You know, people always say blood is thicker than water. That family comes first, that your children will always love you no matter what. Well, let me tell you something. Sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones who cut you the deepest. Sometimes the child you raised, the one you sacrificed everything for, becomes the very person who destroys you. My name is Margaret, and I'm 73 years old. Today I'm going to tell you a story that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. It's about betrayal so profound, so calculated, that it nearly broke me. But it's also about how sometimes, when you're trapped in the darkest place imaginable, the truth finds a way to set you free. It started on a Tuesday morning in September. I remember because the smell of autumn was just beginning to creep into the air, and I was planning to update my apple cinnamon recipe for the bakery's fall menu. I had been running Margaret's Sweet Corner for 42 years, ever since my dear husband Thomas and I opened it together when Sarah was just a baby. That bakery wasn't just a business, it was our legacy, our heart, our everything. But that Tuesday morning, instead of kneading dough and greeting my regular customers, I found myself being dragged up the narrow stairs to our dusty attic by my own daughter and her husband. My own flesh and blood, gripping my arms so tight I knew there would be bruises later. "Mom, we need to have a serious conversation," Sarah said, her voice cold and mechanical. Gone was the sweet girl who used to help me frost cupcakes after school. This woman, my daughter, looked at me with such disdain, such calculation, that I barely recognized her. "What conversation requires hauling me up here like I'm some kind of criminal?" I demanded, my voice already shaking with a fear I didn't want to acknowledge. The attic was cramped and dusty, filled with decades of memories packed away in cardboard boxes and covered with old sheets. "The kind where you finally listen," her husband Marcus spat. Oh, how I despised that man. From the moment Sarah brought him home 15 years ago, I knew he was trouble. He had these cold, calculating eyes that never quite met yours when he smiled. Thomas had seen it too, though he tried to keep his concerns to himself for Sarah's sake. "Listen to what?" I asked. But even as the words left my mouth, I could see what was happening. Marcus was backing toward the door, his hand already reaching for something in his pocket. "Mum, you're not well," Sarah said, and for a split second, I heard something that might have been regret in her voice. "You've been making mistakes with the books, forgetting things, acting unstable. We can't let you hurt yourself or the business anymore." "Unstable?" The word exploded out of me. "I've been running that bakery longer than you've been alive. I know every recipe by heart, every customer by name. What mistakes are you talking about?" But Marcus was already stepping out of the attic, Sarah right behind him. "We'll discuss this more when you've had time to calm down and think clearly," he called back. And then I heard it, the sound that still haunts my nightmares. The heavy wooden door slamming shut, followed immediately by the metallic scrape and click of a padlock being secured. A padlock on the outside of the door. "Sarah!" I screamed, throwing myself against the door so hard that my shoulder exploded with pain. "Sarah, what are you doing? Let me out! Let me out right now!" But all I heard were their footsteps moving away, down the stairs, growing fainter and fainter until there was nothing but silence. I stood there in the dim light filtering through one small, dirty window, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst right out of my chest. The reality of what had just happened crashed over me like a cold wave. My own daughter, had locked me in the attic like some kind of prisoner. Panic set in then, raw and desperate. I beat on that door until my fists were bloody, screamed until my throat was raw, begged and pleaded until I had no voice left, but no one came. No one was coming. Hours passed. Maybe it was 2, maybe it was 5. Time becomes meaningless when you're trapped in a space that feels like a tomb. The afternoon light began to fade from the small window, and with it, my hope of immediate rescue. I slumped against a stack of old boxes, my body shaking from exhaustion and terror. That's when I heard it. A soft creak from somewhere behind the old wardrobe that had been pushed against the far wall. At first, I thought it was just the old house settling, but then it came again. A deliberate, almost rhythmic sound. And suddenly, like a bolt of lightning, I remembered something. A conversation from nearly 30 years ago, just a few months before Thomas died. We had been lying in bed, and he had seemed unusually troubled, almost agitated. "Margaret," he had whispered in the darkness, his voice urgent in a way that made me turn to face him. "If anything ever happens to me, if something goes wrong, you need to check the beam behind the old trunk in the attic." I had asked him what he meant, but he had just shaken his head and pulled me close. "Promise me," he had said. "Promise me you'll remember." The next morning, when I tried to bring it up again, he had acted like the conversation never happened. Within 3 months, he was gone. Sudden heart attack at the age of 58. In my grief, I had forgotten all about his strange midnight message. But now, trapped and desperate, those words came back to me as clearly as if he had just spoken them. I forced myself to stand, my legs wobbling from sitting on the hard floor for so long, and made my way toward the old wardrobe. It took every ounce of strength I had left to push that heavy piece of furniture away from the wall. My muscles screamed in protest, and sweat poured down my face despite the chill in the air. But finally, I managed to move it just enough to squeeze behind it. And there it was. A wooden beam running horizontally along the wall, just like Thomas had said. At first glance it looked like all the others, but when I ran my hands along its length, I found it. A section that felt different, slightly loose. My fingers worked frantically at the wood, and to my amazement, an entire board came free in my hands. Behind it was a small cavity, and nestled inside was a sealed metal tube, about the size of a large flashlight. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip it. Thomas, my beloved Thomas, had hidden this here, all those years ago. But why? What could be so important that he would go to such lengths to conceal it? I stared at that tube for what felt like hours, turning it over and over in my hands. Part of me was desperate to open it immediately, to discover what secrets my husband had kept. But another part of me was terrified. What if whatever was inside made everything worse? What if it contained something that would destroy what little I had left? But first, I needed to understand how I had gotten to this moment. How had my life gone so completely off the rails? When had my daughter stopped being my daughter and become my enemy? I suppose it started gradually, the way these things always do. Sarah had always been a bright child, ambitious and determined. She graduated from college with a business degree and had such big plans for her life. For a while, she worked in the city, in marketing for some big corporation. She seemed happy enough, though she visited less and less as the years went on. Then she met Marcus. He was charming enough on the surface, handsome, well-dressed, articulate. He worked in finance, he said, though he was always vague about the details. When they announced their engagement after only 8 months of dating, Thomas and I had exchanged worried glances. But what could we do? Sarah was 31 years old and perfectly capable of making her own decisions. The wedding was lovely, I'll give them that. Sarah looked radiant in the dress we had picked out together, and for a moment I allowed myself to hope that maybe I had been wrong about Marcus. Maybe he truly loved my daughter and would make her happy. But within a year, I started to notice changes in Sarah. She became more critical, more impatient. She would visit the bakery and point out things that were outdated or inefficient. She suggested I modernize the recipes, update the decor, hire younger staff. None of her suggestions were necessarily wrong, but there was something in her tone that felt dismissive, as if everything Thomas and I had built was somehow beneath her now. Marcus encouraged these attitudes. Oh, he was subtle about it, but I could see what he was doing. He would make offhand comments about old-fashioned business practices and missed opportunities for growth. He had a way of making our simple, successful bakery sound like a quaint relic that was holding everyone back. When Sarah got pregnant with Emma, their first child, Thomas and I were overjoyed. We thought maybe becoming parents would settle them down, help them appreciate family and tradition more. And for a while, it seemed like it worked. Sarah was softer during her pregnancy, more like the daughter I remembered. But after Emma was born, the financial pressures started. Marcus claimed his job was restructuring, and they needed help making ends meet. They asked if they could move in with us temporarily, just until they got back on their feet. The house was plenty big enough, and Thomas and I were getting older. It seemed like it might work out well for everyone. That was our first mistake. Within a month of moving in, Marcus had taken over our home office, claiming he needed space to work on his consulting projects. Sarah began handling the bakery's books, insisting that it would take pressure off me and help her feel more useful while she was on maternity leave. At first, I was grateful for the help. Then little James was born 2 years later, and suddenly their temporary stay became permanent. Not that they asked, mind you, it was just assumed. When I gently suggested that maybe it was time for them to find their own place, Marcus would launch into detailed explanations about the housing market, interest rates, and the importance of building equity rather than throwing money away on rent. Thomas grew increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, but he kept his concerns to himself. He was always a peacekeeper, my Thomas. He didn't want to cause family drama or make Sarah feel unwelcome, but I could see the stress eating away at him. His hair went completely grey in just 2 years, and he developed this nervous habit of drumming his fingers when Marcus was in the room. After Thomas died, everything accelerated. Sarah and Marcus weren't even subtle about it anymore. Within a week of the funeral, Marcus was suggesting that I was too emotional to make important decisions about the business. Sarah started intercepting my mail, claiming she was helping me stay organized. They moved me out of the master bedroom and into the small guest room, saying the bigger room would be better for the children. Every change was presented as being for my own good, for my safety, for my health. But each one stripped away a little more of my independence, a little more of my dignity. I felt like I was disappearing in my own home, becoming invisible in my own life. The bakery suffered too. Marcus implemented new cost-saving measures that meant using cheaper ingredients and cutting staff hours. Sarah redesigned the menu, eliminating many of the traditional recipes that our customers loved. When long-time patrons complained or stopped coming, they blamed it on changing neighborhood demographics or economic downturns. Nothing was ever their fault. I tried to push back, of course. I tried to maintain some control over the business that Thomas and I had spent our lives building. But every time I questioned their decisions or suggested we return to the old ways, they would exchange those looks, those knowing, condescending looks that made me feel like a confused child. "Mom's having one of her difficult days," Sarah would say to Marcus, as if I wasn't standing right there. "Maybe we should call Dr. Patterson," he would reply. "See if he thinks her medication needs adjusting." They made me feel crazy. They made me doubt my own memories, my own judgment. Were the receipts really not adding up the way I thought they were? Was I really forgetting conversations we'd had? Was I truly becoming the confused, unstable old woman they kept suggesting I was? The gaslighting was so constant, so insidious, that there were moments when I almost believed them. Almost. But deep down, in a part of my heart that they couldn't touch, I knew they were lying. I knew I was still sharp, still capable, still the woman who had successfully run a business for 4 decades. That knowledge was what kept me fighting, even when the fighting seemed hopeless. Even when they started talking about future planning and what's best for everyone involved. The morning they dragged me up to the attic, Marcus had cornered me in the kitchen with a stack of papers. "Margaret," he said in that falsely gentle tone he used when he wanted something, "we found a wonderful assisted living facility about an hour away. It's very nice with activities and medical care, everything you could need." "I don't need medical care," I snapped. "I need to be left alone to run my business and live in my house." "Mum," Sarah interjected, her voice sharp with impatience. "You can't live alone anymore. You're 73 years old. What if something happens? What if you fall or forget to turn off the stove? Or—" "I've been taking care of myself for 73 years, I shouted, my anger finally boiling over. "I raised you in this house, built a successful business, managed just fine after your father died. I don't need you to manage my life." That's when Marcus's mask slipped, just for a moment. His eyes went cold and hard, and I saw the real man underneath all that false charm. "Actually, Margaret, you don't have a choice. We've already put the house on the market and contacted a realtor about selling the bakery. The papers are signed, the decisions are made. You can go quietly, or we can have you declared incompetent and make you go. But either way, you're going." The room went dead silent. Sarah was staring at her husband with something that might have been shock, but she didn't contradict him. She didn't defend me. She just stood there while her husband told me I was being thrown out of my own life. "You can't do this," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "This is my house, my business. You can't just—" "We can and we have," Marcus said, straightening his tie with smug satisfaction. "Sarah is our daughter and our primary heir. The transition was always going to happen eventually. We're just expediting the timeline." That's when I lost it completely. I screamed at them, called them thieves and liars and worse things than that. I told them exactly what I thought of their manipulation and their greed. I threatened to call the police, to hire a lawyer, to fight them with everything I had left. And that's when they decided I was unstable and needed to be removed before I could ruin their plans. So there I was, hours later, sitting on the dusty attic floor with my husband's mysterious metal tube clutched in my hands. My throat was raw from screaming, my body ached from throwing myself against the door, and my heart was broken in ways I didn't know were possible. But I was also angry. Not just sad or disappointed, furious. The rage was building in my chest like a fire, burning away the confusion and self-doubt they had spent years instilling in me. How dare they do this to me? How dare they steal my life, my home, my business, and then lock me away like some kind of criminal when I dared to object? With shaking hands, I unscrewed the cap of the metal tube. Inside was a roll of documents, sealed in plastic to protect them from moisture and time. I spread them out on the floor in the dim light from the window, squinting to make out the typewritten words. What I found made my blood run cold. The first document was a notarized property transfer, dated just 3 months before Thomas's death. But it wasn't transferring ownership to Sarah, as I had assumed. It was transferring everything, the house, the bakery, all of our assets, directly to me, with specific provisions that it could never be transferred to anyone else without my explicit consent and the approval of an independent legal advocate. Thomas had made me the sole, irrevocable owner of everything. Sarah wasn't the heir at all. The second document was a letter in Thomas's handwriting, dated the same day as the property transfer. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then something has gone terribly wrong, and my fears about Marcus have proven justified. I pray that day never comes. But I couldn't risk leaving you unprotected. 3 weeks ago, I discovered that Marcus has been embezzling money from the bakery's accounts. He's been skimming cash deposits, manipulating the books, and siphoning funds into personal accounts. I have copies of all the evidence hidden with these papers. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. Instead, he threatened me. He said that if I exposed him, he would make sure Sarah turned against me, against us. He would poison her mind and convince her that we were the problem, not him. He was so calm about it, so confident, that I realized this was not his first time doing something like this. I wanted to go to the police immediately, but Marcus made it clear that he would destroy Sarah's life to save himself. He would claim she was complicit, that she helped him. He had already created false evidence to support that story. Our daughter would go to prison for crimes she didn't commit, so I chose to protect her the only way I could. I documented everything and hid it away, hoping that if Marcus ever tried to move against you after my death, you would find this and have the ammunition to fight back. The notarized property transfer ensures that Sarah cannot simply inherit everything and hand it over to Marcus. You are the sole owner, Margaret, and no one can take that away from you without your consent. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you about this while I was alive. I'm sorry I had to bear this burden alone. But I couldn't risk Marcus finding out and following through on his threats against our daughter. Please forgive me, my love, for not being stronger, and please, when the time comes, be strong enough for both of us. All my love, Thomas. I read that letter 3 times before the words really sank in. Thomas had known. He had known what Marcus was, what he was doing, what he was planning. And he had died carrying that secret, trying to protect both Sarah and me from a truth that would have destroyed our family. But Marcus had gotten to Sarah anyway, hadn't he? He had poisoned her mind, just like he threatened to do. He had turned my daughter against me so completely that she was willing to lock her own mother in an attic. The rest of the documents were copies of bank statements, forged receipts, and transfer records showing exactly how Marcus had been stealing from us for years. The amounts were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars, taken a little at a time over more than a decade. No wonder the bakery had been struggling. No wonder we never seemed to have enough money, despite being busy all the time. I sat there on that dusty floor, clutching those papers, and wept. Not just for the money, though that was devastating. I wept for my husband, who had died carrying this terrible burden. I wept for my daughter, who had been manipulated so thoroughly that she couldn't see what was happening to her own family. And I wept for myself, for the years of doubt and confusion, for believing even for a moment that I was the problem. But as my tears dried, that burning rage returned, stronger than before. Marcus hadn't just stolen my money, he had stolen my family, my confidence, my sense of reality. He had made me question my own mind while he systematically destroyed everything Thomas and I had built. Well, I thought grimly, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand, maybe it was time to return the favor. I looked around the attic with new eyes, searching for anything that might help me. That's when I spotted it, tucked behind a box of Christmas decorations, an old landline phone that Thomas had installed up there years ago when he used the space as a workshop. Sarah and Marcus had obviously forgotten about it when they disconnected the phones in the rest of the house. My hands were shaking as I picked up the receiver. Please, I prayed silently, please let this still work. When I heard the dial tone, I could have cried with relief. I called the only person I could think of, Judge Harrison Webb, who had been Thomas's closest friend since childhood and had officiated at our wedding. Harry was retired now, but he still had connections, and more importantly, he had known Thomas well enough to believe what I was about to tell him. "Harry," I said when he answered, trying to keep my voice steady, "it's Margaret. I need help, and I need it urgently." 20 minutes later, I had explained everything. Harry listened without interruption, asking only a few clarifying questions. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Margaret?" he said finally, his voice heavy with anger. "This is elder abuse, financial abuse, psychological abuse, unlawful imprisonment. We're talking about serious criminal charges here." "I know," I whispered. "But Harry, I need to be smart about this. If I just call the police right now, Marcus will spin some story about me being mentally unstable. He'll say I was confused, dangerous, that they were trying to protect me. I need evidence. I need proof that even he can't talk his way around." "What do you have in mind?" I explained Thomas's documents, the evidence of embezzlement, the illegal property transfer claims. Harry took notes, asking for specific details about dates and amounts. Then he gave me the best advice I'd received in years. "Stay exactly where you are," he said. "Don't let them know you found anything. Act defeated, broken, like they've won. Meanwhile, I'm going to make some calls. I know a financial investigator who specializes in this kind of fraud, and there's an attorney who focuses on senior rights cases. We're going to build an airtight case, and then we're going to destroy them." "But Harry, what if they try to move me to that facility before—" "They won't," he said firmly. "Moving you against your will when you're the legal property owner would be kidnapping. Even Marcus isn't stupid enough to try that. He needs you to sign papers willingly, or at least appear to. That gives us time." After I hung up, I forced myself to sit quietly and think through everything that had happened. Thomas's letter had said that Marcus threatened to frame Sarah for his crimes. Did that mean she truly didn't know about the embezzlement? Had she been manipulated just as much as I had, in her own way? The thought made my heart ache even worse. My poor daughter, married to a man who had been systematically stealing from her own family and lying to her about it for years. No wonder she had become so bitter and critical. Marcus had probably been filling her head with stories about the bakery's poor performance, about my inability to manage money, about the need for them to take control before everything collapsed. But even if Sarah was a victim too, that didn't excuse what she had done to me today. It didn't excuse years of condescension and manipulation. It didn't excuse locking her own mother in an attic like some kind of prisoner. I could hear voices downstairs now, muffled but excited. They were celebrating. They thought they had won, thought they had finally gotten rid of the stubborn old woman who was standing in the way of their grand plans. "Realtor said we could list it next week. Facility said they can take her on Thursday. Finally have some peace. Bakery space would be perfect for that coffee chain." Each word was like a knife in my heart. They were already planning to destroy everything Thomas and I had spent our lives building. They were going to sell our home to strangers and turn our beloved bakery into some soulless corporate chain. Not if I had anything to say about it. I spent the next few hours going through every single document Thomas had hidden, memorizing every detail, every date, every fraudulent transaction. I found records going back 15 years. Marcus had been stealing from us almost from the moment he married Sarah. The man had never loved my daughter. He had seen her as a means to an end, a way to gain access to our family's assets. As the afternoon wore on, I could hear more voices downstairs. They were having people over, probably celebrating their victory. I heard laughter, the clink of glasses, the sounds of a party happening in my own home while I was locked away, like some kind of family shame. But I wasn't defeated. Not anymore. I was armed with the truth, and I was angrier than I had ever been in my life. Let them celebrate. Let them think they had won. Tomorrow, their whole world was going to come crashing down. Judge Webb called me back that evening, just as the sun was setting and the attic was growing dark. "Everything's arranged," he said quietly. "The investigator has already started pulling bank records. Apparently, Marcus has been very sloppy about covering his tracks. And the attorney is preparing an emergency motion. We'll have everything we need by tomorrow afternoon." What about proof that they locked me up here? Do you still have that old tape recorder Thomas used for his workshop notes? I looked around and spotted it on a shelf, covered in dust. Yes, but does it still work? Only one way to find out. If it does, leave it running. Get them talking about what they've done, their plans for you, anything incriminating. The more evidence we have, the stronger our case. The party downstairs was getting louder. I could hear Sarah's laugh, the first time I'd heard her truly laugh in months. It broke my heart that she could be so happy about destroying her own mother. I found the tape recorder and, miraculously, it still worked. The batteries were nearly dead, but there was enough power for a few hours of recording. I placed it near the attic door, where it would pick up any conversations that happened nearby. Then I settled back against the wall to wait. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. I must have dozed off at some point because I was awakened by voices right outside the attic door. Marcus and Sarah, talking in low tones. Still feel bad about, Sarah was saying. Don't, Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp. She brought this on herself. If she had just been reasonable, if she had just signed the papers like we asked, none of this would have been necessary. But locking her up like this, it feels wrong. Sarah, listen to me. Your mother is sick. She's paranoid, delusional, probably developing dementia. We're protecting her from herself. Do you want her wandering around the house at night, maybe starting a fire or hurting herself? Do you want her sabotaging the sale because she's confused about what's best for the family? There was a long pause. I know you're right, Sarah said finally. It's just hard. She's my mother. She's a sick old woman who doesn't understand what's happening to her, Marcus replied coldly. The sooner we get her into professional care, the better off everyone will be, including her. What if she tries to fight the commitment proceedings? She won't. Dr. Patterson already agreed to sign the papers saying she's mentally incompetent. And even if she tried to contest it, who would believe her? A confused elderly woman claiming her devoted daughter and son-in-law are trying to steal from her, especially when we have medical documentation of her declining mental state. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from gasping out loud. They had it all planned out. The doctor, the legal proceedings, the lies they would tell. They were going to have me declared mentally incompetent and take everything, all while claiming they were the loving family members just trying to help. The realtor thinks we can get at least $400,000 for the house, Sarah said, and I could hear the greed creeping into her voice. And the bakery property is worth even more, especially if we sell it to that development company. Just remember, Marcus said, we need to be patient. Let her get settled in the facility, let a few months pass, and then we can start liquidating assets. If we move too fast, it might raise questions. Their footsteps moved away, but I kept the tape recorder running. Over the next hour, I heard fragments of other conversations, talk about investments, about Marcus's consulting business, which I now realized was probably just a front for money laundering, about their plans for the Children's Education Fund. My grandchildren, poor Emma and James, who had no idea what kind of man their father really was. What kind of legacy was Marcus going to leave them? What lessons was he teaching them about family, about loyalty, about right and wrong? The next morning, I heard them moving around downstairs, getting ready for what they clearly expected to be a routine day of finalizing their plans. I heard Sarah on the phone with the assisted living facility, confirming my admission for the following day. But I also heard another voice. Someone at the front door, someone Sarah didn't seem to recognize. Mrs. Grant, my name is Rebecca Martinez. I'm an attorney specializing in elder rights, and I need to speak with you about your mother's legal status. The house went dead silent. I'm sorry, Sarah said, her voice carefully controlled. But I don't know what you're talking about. My mother is upstairs resting. She's not well and she can't have visitors right now. Actually, Mrs. Grant, I have a court order requiring me to verify Mrs. Margaret Thompson's welfare and to ensure she has access to legal counsel. I'll need to speak with her directly." "That's impossible," Marcus's voice now, sharp and aggressive. "Mrs. Thompson is suffering from dementia and is not capable of making legal decisions. We have medical documentation. Sir, I'm going to need to see that documentation, along with any guardianship papers or power of attorney documents you may have. But first, I need to speak with Mrs. Thompson herself." I could hear them scrambling, whispering urgently to each other. They had never expected anyone to come looking for me. They thought they had been so careful, so clever. "She's locked in the attic," I heard Sarah finally admit. "We had to. She was becoming violent, dangerous. We were protecting her until we could get her proper help." "Ma'am," the attorney said, her voice ice cold, "you're telling me that you've unlawfully confined an elderly person against her will. That's a serious crime." "It's not unlawful," Marcus protested. "She's our responsibility, and she was a danger to herself and others. Do you have medical orders authorizing confinement, a psychiatric hold, any legal documentation whatsoever that would justify locking someone in an attic?" Silence. "I thought not. I need you to unlock that door immediately or I'll be calling the police." I heard footsteps on the stairs, urgent whispers, the scrape of the padlock being removed. When the door finally opened, I was ready for them. I had made myself look as pathetic as possible, dishevelled hair, tear-stained face, clothes wrinkled from sleeping on the floor. I wanted that attorney to see exactly what had been done to me. "Mrs. Thompson," she said gently, stepping into the attic. She was a small woman, probably in her 40s, with kind eyes and a professional manner that immediately made me feel safer. "I'm Rebecca Martinez. Judge Webb sent me. Are you all right?" "I'm not hurt," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "But I need to show you something." Behind the attorney, I could see Sarah and Marcus crowding in the doorway, their faces pale and strained. They had no idea what was coming. I handed Rebecca the metal tube with all of Thomas's documents. "My husband hid these before he died. He knew what they were planning." As Rebecca examined the papers, her expression grew darker and darker. "Mrs. Thompson," she said finally, "you're telling me that your son-in-law has been embezzling from your business for 15 years. "That's ridiculous," Marcus exploded. "She's confused, delusional. She doesn't know what those papers are." "Actually, Mr. Grant, I know exactly what they are," Rebecca said, standing up and facing him with steely determination. "These are copies of bank statements, forged receipts, and fraudulent transaction records. And this," she held up the property transfer, "is a notarized document making Mrs. Thompson the sole legal owner of all family assets, with specific provisions preventing anyone from removing her from the property without her consent and court approval." Sarah looked like she had been slapped. "That's impossible. The bakery, the house, they're supposed to be part of our inheritance. We've been managing everything because she can't—" "Mrs. Grant," Rebecca interrupted, "your mother is the legal owner of everything. You have no inheritance because these assets were never intended to pass to you. And according to these documents, your husband has been systematically stealing from your own family for over a decade." I watched the colour drain from Sarah's face as the truth hit her. All those years of Marcus complaining about the bakery's poor performance, about my financial mismanagement, about the need for them to take control, it had all been lies. He had been stealing from us and then blaming the resulting problems on me. "That's not— he wouldn't—" Sarah looked at her husband, searching his face for some kind of denial, some explanation that would make this all make sense. But Marcus wasn't even trying to deny it anymore. His mask had finally slipped completely, and I could see the cold, calculating predator underneath. "Sarah, don't listen to them. They're trying to turn you against me, against us. Your mother is sick, confused. Mr. Grant, Rebecca said sharply, I suggest you stop talking and start calling a lawyer. Based on these documents and the testimony I've gathered, you're looking at charges of embezzlement, financial elder abuse, false imprisonment, and fraud. Mrs. Thompson, I'm also going to recommend filing charges for unlawful confinement. That's when Sarah finally spoke up, her voice small and broken. Mum, is it true? Has Marcus really been stealing from us? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, for the first time in years. Behind the hardness, behind the criticism and resentment, I could see the scared, confused woman she had become. Marcus had manipulated her just as much as he had manipulated me in his own way. Yes, sweetheart, I said gently. For 15 years, he's been taking money from the bakery and blaming the problems on me. Your father knew about it before he died, but Marcus threatened to frame you for his crimes if he exposed him. Sarah collapsed into a chair, her hands covering her face. Oh God! Oh my God! What have we done? What have I done? Mrs. Grant, Rebecca said, her voice gentler now. It appears that you've been manipulated and lied to as well. However, that doesn't excuse the actions you've taken today. Locking your mother in an attic, regardless of your reasons, is still a crime. Over the next few hours, the house filled with officials, police officers, a financial investigator, a social worker to assess my well-being. Marcus was arrested on multiple felony charges, led away in handcuffs, while he protested his innocence to anyone who would listen. Sarah wasn't arrested, but she was questioned extensively. The investigators determined that while she had been complicit in my confinement, she appeared to be genuinely unaware of her husband's financial crimes. She would face charges for the imprisonment, but they would likely be reduced given the circumstances. The hardest part was watching my grandchildren being taken away temporarily by child services. Emma, who was 13 now, seemed to understand that something terrible was happening. Little James, only 8, just cried and asked why Daddy was gone and why everyone was so upset. Sarah begged me to help her keep the children, but I couldn't. Not yet. She had chosen her husband over her own mother, had allowed herself to be convinced that I was the enemy. She needed time to understand what had really happened, to take responsibility for her actions, and to prove that she could protect her children from future manipulation. The financial investigation took weeks, but the results were even worse than I had expected. Marcus had stolen over $800,000 from the bakery over the years, money that should have been profits, savings, funds for improvements and growth. No wonder we had always struggled financially despite being busy all the time. But with Thomas's evidence and the investigators' work, we were able to trace where most of the money had gone. Marcus had been living a double life, maintaining expensive habits and secret accounts that Sarah knew nothing about. Much of it could be recovered through asset seizure and restitution orders. The property transfer held up in court, confirming that I was indeed the sole legal owner of everything. Marcus's attempts to claim power of attorney or guardianship were thrown out when multiple medical professionals confirmed that I was mentally competent and had been unlawfully confined. Sarah's divorce proceedings began immediately. She moved out of the house and into a small apartment, working with a court-appointed counselor to address the psychological manipulation she had endured. It was hard watching her struggle with the realization that her entire married life had been built on lies. But I could see glimpses of my real daughter starting to emerge again. The criminal trials took almost a year. Marcus was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. He showed no remorse, continuing to claim that he was the victim of a family conspiracy against him. Even in the end, he couldn't accept responsibility for what he had done. Sarah pleaded guilty to unlawful confinement charges and received community service and probation. She also had to complete therapy and parenting classes before she could regain custody of her children. It was a long, painful process, but gradually, she began to understand how thoroughly she had been manipulated. Today, 3 years later, I'm sitting in the restored attic of my home, looking out at the garden Thomas and I planted 45 years ago. This space isn't a prison anymore, it's my sanctuary. I turned it into a memorial workshop where I can remember my husband and work on projects that bring me joy. The bakery is thriving again. I hired new staff, returned to the traditional recipes our customers loved, and rebuilt the sense of community that had always been our strength. Sarah works there now too, slowly earning back my trust and learning the business the right way this time. My grandchildren visit every weekend. Emma is 16 now and helps in the bakery sometimes, learning the family traditions that her parents almost destroyed. James loves hearing stories about his grandfather and the secret hideaway in the attic where Grandpa kept his most important treasures. Sarah and I are rebuilding our relationship slowly, carefully. There's still pain there, still hurt that may never fully heal. But I can see that she understands now what she almost lost, what she almost destroyed. She's working hard to become the daughter I raised her to be, and the mother her children deserve. Sometimes, late at night, I come up here to this attic and think about that terrible day when they locked me away. I think about how close they came to succeeding, how easily they might have taken everything if Thomas hadn't been smart enough to hide the truth where only I would find it. But mostly, I think about the strength I found in this dusty, dark space. The strength to fight back, to stand up for myself, to refuse to be victimized. The strength to forgive my daughter while still holding her accountable for her actions. The strength to rebuild my life at an age when most people would have given up. You see, sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who hurt you deepest. Sometimes your own family becomes your greatest enemy. But that doesn't mean you're powerless. That doesn't mean you have to accept betrayal and abuse just because it comes from people who share your blood. The truth has a way of hiding in the darkest corners, waiting for the right moment to come into the light. And when it does, when you finally have the strength and the evidence and the support you need to fight back, justice can be more satisfying than any revenge. My name is Margaret Thompson. I'm 76 years old now, and I'm not anyone's victim. I'm a survivor, a fighter, and the proud owner of a legacy that no one can ever take away from me again. If this story has touched you in some way, if you've faced betrayal from people you trusted, if you've ever felt powerless against manipulation and abuse, I want you to know this: you are stronger than you think. You deserve respect, dignity, and honesty from the people in your life. And if they can't give you those things, then you owe them nothing. Fight for yourself. Fight for what's right. And remember that sometimes the truth is just waiting for you to be brave enough to find it. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe if you want to hear more real stories from real people who refuse to give up. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to know that my story has reached people all around the world who understand what it means to stand up for yourself when no one else will. Remember, you are not alone, you are not powerless, and you are not too old to fight for what's yours. Until next time, this is Margaret Thompson, reminding you that sometimes the darkest moments show us just how bright our light can shine.